Today we're diving into a revealing look at what Houstonians really think about living in the Bayou City and why nearly half say they've thought about leaving at some point. That's just one of the standout findings from the 2025 Kinder Houston Area Survey released by Rice University's Kinder Institute for Urban Research. It's the most comprehensive survey in the study's 44-year history, capturing voices from across Harris, Fort Bend, and Montgomery counties, home to nearly 1 in 5 Texans. What do the results tell us about life in Greater Houston, from economic divides to the region's celebrated diversity? And how do we reconcile the fact that most residents say they're doing okay, yet mainly feel stuck, citing affordability, safety, and infrastructure as pressing concerns? Joining us to break it all down is Daniel Potter, Director of Research at the Kinder Institute. Daniel, welcome back to Hello Houston.
Thank you for having me.
I mean, this seems like quite a comprehensive study you did. And I think obviously we hear that conversation constantly coming up. Obviously, Houston has a lot of natural disasters that hit us from all areas. Mm-hmm. We always, on Houston Matters, they have a whole segment called Houston Pet Peeves. So when you did this, what were y'all really looking for? I mean, a pulse check on the city?
Yeah, so this is one of those studies that we have been doing for an amazing 44 consecutive years. And so by having that kind of longitudinal look, it gives us an opportunity to understand where we've been, where we are, and hopefully also that idea of where are we going. And so with this year's report, one of the data points that has been sort of unique and interesting about the Houston area is when you compare us against other major metropolitan areas in the country. So here, think about your LAs, your Chicagos, your New Yorks. We are growing leaps and bounds faster than they are. In fact, we are growing faster than any of the other top 10 largest metro areas in the nation, with the exception of Dallas. We're neck and neck with them. But moving past that point, we are growing.
Why?
And so that was the question. That was ultimately what we wanted to get at, was what is going on here that's pulling people in, keeping people grounded, rooted here, and allowing for this city to add 1.5 million people over the last 15 years.
And how did you go about with collecting this data?
So fortunately for us, we're able to leverage data coming out of the Census Bureau to understand some of the population dynamics that are taking place in this area. But with that knowledge coming out of that census data, we're then able to reach out to people with surveys from all of these different groups to understand what their own experiences, circumstances, conditions, values, and preferences happen to be. So we're not just looking at the census data, but rather using that as a backdrop to understand what's going on here in Houston.
Any idea how many people you looked at?
So we ended up hearing from almost 10,000 people on this most recent survey. It is the largest administration of the Kinder Houston Area Survey we have ever done. And it was the first time since 2018 that we've included Fort Bend and Montgomery County as well.
Could it be that people are also just moving here because we have space?
So one of the things that we saw from people in terms of what brings them to the areas, it is jobs, it is family, and it is the cost of living. And I would say that space sort of is part of that equation, in that we've got the jobs that are moving in here. We've got that opportunity to own a home where you're not having to throw $750,000 for a 2-bedroom apartment, right? You can still get into reasonably affordable housing. Now, we want to recognize and acknowledge we have absolutely become a more expensive place to live over the last 15 years as well. Median cost of housing back in 2010 was $165,000. It's up north of $330,000 more recently.
I would think that the fact that we don't have a state income tax is a big draw.
So that is an attractive thing for certain residents that are coming in as well. And again, that just goes back to that cost of living piece, is that people feel like they're getting a good deal living in Houston.
Well, before we get to why people don't like Houston, let's talk more about why people do like
Houston.
Yeah.
So what are the positives that have come out of this survey?
Yeah, so we asked people point blank, what's the thing you like most about the Houston area? And we gave them an open text box to let them tell us what they thought. Number one answer, diversity.
Interesting.
And that's their word. not ours. It was this appreciation for all of the different cultures, communities, the different people that are melting and melding together in this space that we know here as Houston. And that was something that people appreciated. That was the number one response. Another one of the big responses we got from people was also local community and just that local flavor that people have. So both an appreciation for the diversity that is Houston, as well as that appreciation for their sort of local context. Beyond that, we talk about economic opportunities, and we also can talk about the activities. People love the concerts, the sporting events. They also enjoy that local community theater and live music down the street type situations. And we would, of course, be remiss to not mention the food.
The food. I would have thought the Med Center would be a big player, and the fact that we have 2 really good airports and that we're right in the middle of the world. You know, Houston, you can get anywhere.
3 hours away from everywhere.
Yeah, from everywhere. So, okay, do we have to talk about the negatives?
Well, I was going to say, we do have a comment right now, and we are talking with Daniel Potter, the Director of Research at the Kinder Institute, about a massive survey that they've been doing, the 2025 Kinder Houston Area Survey. You can join the conversation at 713-440-8870. Now, we did have a question that says, Daniel, I know you are researching what is making people want to move and stay in Houston, but what do you know about the number one reason that makes people want to leave Houston?
So when we think about leaving the Houston area, we can think of this as push and pull factors. So the push factors are going to be those things about the Houston area that people are not liking, and so it's pushing them to leave. The pull factors are sort of those things that exist elsewhere that are pulling you out of the Houston area. And so we've asked questions about number one biggest problem facing the Houston area, and it's the things we would sort of appreciate and recognize: crime and safety, infrastructure, public safety. That's the crime and safety one. Talking about traffic as another one, the economy, cost of housing. These are things that we know people see as challenges for the Houston area. But when we asked them what was the reason, so are you thinking about leaving? About 40% of residents said, yeah, I've considered moving out of the Houston area. And we said, okay, why? What was the thing? Number one reason given was new people, new places, new opportunities. Yeah. So it was recognizing there's a world beyond Houston. And many residents would, and again, it was one of those open-ended responses. So people are writing things like, I've only ever lived here. And I know that there are other places, communities, and cultures that are out there. Why not go experience them? People would talk about, I'm retiring, and so I don't have to be here, and I'm ready to go see what's it like in the mountains, what's it like in, other places. And again, so for us, there was this sort of, yes, it is telling that about 40% of residents are saying, yeah, I've thought about getting out of here. But when you're asking why, it's not something we're doing per se, but just an acknowledgement.
Grass is greener.
There's a grass. Well, so we looked at economic opportunities as a whole separate other category, and that was one of the other reasons as well. This was sort of just an appreciation and a curiosity for the world around them.
Speaking of that, did they divide it into whether they wanted to stay in the United States, or more people saying, Mexico or Canada or Europe? Or a lot of people say Portugal because it's kind of the way to get into the European Union.
Gotcha.
Kind of cheaply,
Gotcha. When we were, so if anybody named a location, it was typically mountains. And so we had a lot of people talking about Colorado.
Cool. They want cool weather.
I reading between the lines, I would agree with that statement.
Colorado's expensive, but we do have a call on the line. We have a call from Joseph from Tomball. Joseph, welcome to Hello Houston. What is your comment for Daniel?
Good morning to all of you. Well, the cost of living is very important. An example, I moved from New York to Houston 5 years ago, and the rent was killing me over there. I couldn't buy a house because it was too expensive. But actually, tomorrow, I am moving to a luxury apartment. And listen to this, luxury. It has 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. Everything is brand new for $1,700. When in New York, I was paying for 2-bedroom, super old apartment for $3,800. So
wow.
All my family, whoever come visit me, they'll be like, oh, my God, I'm driving my own truck here. I don't have to push nobody on the train. And although in the house here, even if you think about it, I do appliances. I go house to house, and a lot of people are selling their houses in Florida and California. You know, they sell one house over there, they buy two houses here. They rent one and they live in another one. So Houston is the place to whoever is listening to me. Hello, Houston.
Oh,
Thanks,
great.
Joseph. We appreciate it. And congratulations on your new apartment.
Absolutely.
And so there's got to be a downside, or at least a little concern, of growing so quickly. If nothing else, we still do have flooding issues, and infrastructure is always going to be a challenge. Potholes out there, traffic is getting worse. What are the number one things that are going on with that kind of explosive population growth?
Yeah, and there is a growing appreciation that while Houston is already quite large in the region, and sort of a regional comment right there, there is an appreciation that we are at risk of sort of getting ahead of ourselves, that we don't have the infrastructure built out. We don't have the type of, and that infrastructure, think power grid, think roads, think drainage. There's also that concern that where, Houston, let's hop in our time machine, go back 1,000 years. It's a swampy space, marshes, and this is where water would just seep into the ground and run off. But you start paving that stuff over, and all of a sudden, places that maybe hadn't flooded previously because they were benefiting from those open fields and marshy type areas, that is no longer the case. And so flooding starts popping up in different areas. And so especially as we continue to develop spaces that were previously just open, you could sort of almost think of them as natural green infrastructure. As they go away, those put additional challenges.
We have another call. This one's from Noah from Summerwood. Hi, Noah. What's on your mind?
Hey, good morning, folks.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So I've lived in Houston my entire life. I've lived in several different neighborhoods. I actually lived on the UH campus during college, and I would say the biggest factor that would make me want to move away from Houston is the lack of public transit. Yep. I really hate car dependency, and when I lived on campus at U of H, I really appreciated the accessibility of the metro system, but since I've moved away, it's been kind of impossible to use the metro. I think if you live within the 610 loop, it's sort of doable, but once you leave, it's borderline impossible. And I visited other cities like Chicago with much better transit, and it really is like night and day.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. He has a very good point. I envy the good subway systems in the metro of Washington, D.C., places like that. We don't have that. We're not going to have that. We're never going to have that. The Metro Rail we have is a joke in so many ways. People don't even go on it. In some cases around the Galleria, they never even get on that train. So there is the lack of good transit. We've had discussions about bike lanes. We lack a walkable, enjoyable neighborhoods is a real miss in Houston.
So when we think about things like public transportation, I mean, traffic was the number one biggest problem facing Fort Bend and Montgomery County residents. So this is absolutely something that people are calling out and calling attention to.
So you said facing which residents?
This is going to be Fort Bend and Montgomery.
And now we've had multiple local leaders who have talked about that. We have a large influx of Montgomery County residents and Fort Bend County residents coming into Houston. Daniel, when we are looking at this survey, talk to us about that public transit type of situation. What do people want?
And I think that's the important question is when we can look at the numbers, we can look at the layout, we can understand that there are limitations to a public transportation system sort of working that way it may work in other cities. But a lot of that also is based on what is currently. It's not necessarily taken into consideration how you could potentially plan for a public transportation system to work, right? And so I think as you have more and increasingly this call for some sort of passive transportation that will help people move around the area, whether that is light rail, whether that is just a more functional rapid bus line that doesn't just hit up the Galveston, Sharpstown area and downtown, but rather is sort of far reaching and helping to connect the entire area. There is going to be this tension between what is and what is a limited amount of people using public transportation, though we shouldn't downplay the number of folks that rely rely on public transportation for their day-to-day commute, but also what could be, right? And I think that's the thing that sometimes there's a tension around.
So when we are looking at planning, what is it about Houston? Because we do have a comment that says, come to the railroad capital of the world, Chicago. So when you do go to other cities and they're able to get it together, what is it about Houston that public transportation, yes, there are a large number of people that do rely on it, but the majority of people use their own cars. So what is it? Is it lack of planning within our city? Was this supposed to have happened 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, and now we're seeing the effects of that? And what needs to happen moving forward if we do want to start implementing more public transportations?
So we can absolutely look back in time to where you see certain neighborhoods had public transportation in them. They had rail lines that had subsequently been ripped out of them, right? And so there's sort of been this interesting like step forward, step backwards, and then trying to get forward again type thing. I think when we are looking at like what are some of the challenges, in one word, it's densification. Right. It's that when you think about areas, Chicago, New York, DC, these are areas that within a quarter mile of a station, you are oftentimes having a whole bunch of people. And in the Houston area, yes, you can find pockets of very dense populations. But really, once you get outside of that, it's very difficult to find that kind of population density. And so it makes it difficult to pitch the idea of putting in some sort of station or rail line, because the argument would be made there is not a built-in community around it that would leverage it, that would benefit from it. And again, for me, that's sort of an acknowledgement of, yes, that's what is. We also want to focus on what could be. And then I think the other challenge is that, having lived in DC for a second myself, like I was willing to walk the half mile, 3/4 mile to get to that station. And in DC, sometimes in the summer, that's a little bit of a hike, but most of the year, that's just a pleasant stroll, maybe even something that requires a coat. Right. In Houston, that's going to make you shrivel up and, get quite sweaty in that short period of time.
Yes, exactly. And again, we invite you to the conversation, 713-440-8870.
Well, so we take this Kinder Institute data that you have. We talked about what to do as far as transit is concerned. What other lessons has this taught you?
Well, I think one of the big things that we took away from this year's report had to do with economic inequality. Inequality, yes. That there are very different experiences happening in Houston based on how much you were earning. There are different experiences in terms of job opportunities that are out there. There are different experiences in terms of quality of life. There are different experiences in terms of financial security. What I earn shapes my experience here in Houston.
And that's everywhere.
I was about to say that is arguably not necessarily some indictment on Houston per se, but that is perhaps an indictment on the system more broadly. And just acknowledging here in the Houston area those differences that exist where, if you make less than $25,000 a year, 70% of those residents said that they do not have $400 to cover an unexpected expense. Compare that to folks making over $100,000, it's less than 1 in 10 don't have that money sitting around. And so these very different levels of financial vulnerability there. What's very interesting about this was that when we were asking folks, well, what do you want to do about it? That was where things really got interesting this year. Because again, first time we've heard from Montgomery and Fort Bend County on these things in over a decade. And so we were asking point blank, do you feel like the government should do more to close the gap between the rich and the poor? 80% agreed with that statement. 80% in Fort Bend, 80% in Harris County, 70% in Montgomery County.
Nice.
Daniel Potter is the Director of Research at the Kinder Institute. Daniel, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.